Mr. Bond, we trust that you are doing well in this festive holiday season. However, once more, we must come to you and your impossible mission force team to resolve yet another rather significant problem. Certainly, if only by watching Hollywood action spy thrillers, you are familiar with the term knock list. And even sources on the internet explain to amateurs that in espionage, your work, operatives under non-official cover, or NOC, NOC, are operatives without official ties to the government for which they work, who assume covert roles in organizations. To use the popular phrase, operating in safe social distancing. Yes, I believe I possess some familiarity with that term. Of course. And as you know, this presents a clear and present, not danger, but distinct contrast to an operative with official cover, engaged in overt operations, where they assume a position in their government, such as the diplomatic service, which provides them with diplomatic immunity if their espionage activities are discovered. Operatives under non-official cover do not quite have this readily available safety net. And of course, if captured and charged as spies, are subject to severe criminal punishments, up to and including execution. But of course, operatives under non-official cover are also usually trained to deny any connection with their government, thus preserving plausible deniability, but also denying them any hope of diplomatic legal assistance or official acknowledgement of their services. That certainly does not seem like a profession to be undertaken by the needy. They're essentially disavowed, and are very much well aware that they are disavowed, and there shall be no attempt whatsoever to engage in their rescue. Such overt endorsement would, of course, create some diplomatic problems and compromise our covert missions and operations, as well as potentially expose sensitive tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, which would not be in our best interest to have exposed for public scrutiny. Discretion is, as they say, the better part of valor. Nonetheless, such an operative or agent may be referred to as a NOC, or even as an illegal, as often described in manuals pertaining to clandestine human intelligence or human operational techniques. Sometimes, even front companies or straw man entities are established in order to provide false identities for agents, you may be aware, serving as what is often described as a cover or cover story. So, get out with it. What is the problem statement? Clearly, Mr. Bond. However, from simply a management perspective, this is not a car dealership, pal, and there have to be some controls, if only to provide an intelligence agency with a roster or inventory for accountability purposes of these very unique assets, especially for those who may possess, as we say, special skills or knowledge. And hence we have this familiar term described as the knock list that everybody's always trying to get in movies. Well, Mr. Bond, moving beyond human resources management, HR, we also find a need to protect certain information for purposes of national security, which would therefore warrant a designation as classified information. confidential, secret, even top secret. And even within those well-defined categories, we may require additional security measures for particularly sensitive information about which only those with a valid need to know may be aware. Eyes only, warranting compartmentalization, often described as SCI. This, of course, should all simply be reviewed for a person like yourself. But it is essential that you understand this aspect before beginning to address what has become a slight problem at the highest levels of government, and all connected to events during which we were hit with a virus that was met with silence and spread unchecked, as denials for days, weeks, then months had led to more deaths, more infections, more stress, and more loneliness. How so, Ian? This is where it gets just a little bit more interesting, James. Or shall we say, complicated. As you know, according to the CDC, based in Atlanta, the infectious dose for COVID-19, or the specific amount of SARS-CoV-2 needed to transmit infection, has not yet been established. Is that a problem? Well, the father of our modern understanding of infectious disease, one Robert Koch, had developed a methodology to determine that very basic epidemiological metric for assessment of transmissibility risk in 1870. In Sesame Street simplicity, it is just the how many licks does it take to get to the center of a goddamned Tootsie Roll Pop test. And for a validated highly contagious disease, that number never exceeds more than just 15 particles. COVID-19 had emerged in China in November or December of 2019. And they couldn't count to 15 in that time. That should raise just a little bit of a reasonable inference of suspicion in that that number has not yet been established by now. That would make common sense. Certainly. At least in tactical military operations engaged in deliberate planning, even if mathematical comparisons are sometimes subjective, should be tempered by judgments surrounding intangible factors as well as the number and type of vehicles in units. You cannot develop a reasonably calculated plan to prevent or mitigate an invisible enemy if you do not even know the number of adversaries you are fighting against. Can't win a war by rosing up intelligence. That only begins our little problem. James, the request for documents under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, had been submitted to the White House in March 2021. OMB FOIA number 21-220, simply to determine whether that standard epidemiological metric for assessment of transmissibility risk was classified information. Why would that matter? Well, there are actually well-established rules, Mr. Bond, on what can be and what cannot be classified and how that is to be performed. First of all, in no case shall information be classified in order to conceal violations of law, inefficiency, or administrative error. That should be common sense. But also, information cannot be classified to prevent embarrassment to a person, organization, or agency, or even to restrain competition. Further, information cannot be classified to prevent or delay the release of information that does not require protection in the interest of national security. there must be a national security interest, and absent a claim of need to protect military, diplomatic, or sensitive national security secrets, we find it very difficult to accept the argument that even the very important interest in confidentiality of presidential communications is significantly diminished by production of such material for in-camera inspection with all the protections that a district court will be obliged to provide. Well, perhaps. Then if this information is classified, there is some national security interest. In this instance, James, national security means the national defense or foreign relations of the United States. But please, don't get ahead of yourself or jump to immediate conclusions, Mr. Bond, because there are some other rules for classifying information that may make this just a bit more clear. For instance, basic scientific research information not clearly related to the national security may not be classified. This would include metrics on this virus like infectious dose or even secondary attack rate, which intriguingly also remains officially unknown. But most importantly, information like infectious dose may not be considered for classification unless it concerns military plans, weapon systems, or operations. Like a biological weapon. Precisely. A biological weapon system. And if you were to review the submissions presented by Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson for producing what are called vaccines but countermeasures in the declaration, you would find, for instance, in their application submitted by Moderna, they state that the chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear CBRN agent referred to in the March 27, 2020 EUA declaration by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, SARS-CoV-2 can cause a serious or life-threatening disease or condition. CBRN, okay, so what of it? This term, Mr. Bond, is lifted straight from the Emergency Use Authorization Declaration. And technically the term CBRN stands for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, and relates to specific hazards that may be encountered during an incident. However, this term CBRN is generally reserved for the deliberate release of hazardous materials such as in a terrorist attack, not an infectious virus pandemic, whereas the term hazmat is used for accidental release, escaping from labs, or naturally spilling over, or exposure to toxic industrial material. Oh my. Now you are starting to see our little problem. This FOIA request, OMB 21-220, required 3 litigations to compel any response at all from the White House, and is now going on its 4th straight year in litigation. However, on August 29, 2024, the Deputy General Counsel for the White House, one Heather B. Walsh, Esquire, had filed under penalties of perjury a sworn and signed declaration stating that after a search spanning 2 years in coordination with the National Security Council, exhaustively examining classified emails, they were unable to locate any documents responsive to that FOIA request.
No ticket, no laundry.
Again, James, it's not quite that simple, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. The requester was only looking for one document. Under the rules, When information is classified, it requires a person with original classification authority, a person delegated this authority by the president, a known individual by somebody with a need to know. At the time of original classification, when this occurs, this transaction is committed to a memorializing record, a document, so that anyone wishing to scrutinize this determination will readily know exactly who had classified the information and the reasons for that determination at the time. Common sense should dictate that that document is not going to be floating around on email for everybody to look at, but is probably in a secure area like a SCIF and locked in a safe with an access roster and some sort of document control to include an inventory. All the classified information in that storage device and who has access to it. But for some reason or other, the White House chose not to simply search there before beginning a 2-year voyage into classified email land to try to locate a document. It sounds like something that they did not want to locate. I can't say. You can't say, or you can't say. I can't say. However, for purposes of classification, information means any knowledge that can be communicated or documentary material, regardless of its physical form or characteristics, that is owned by, produced by, or for, or is under the control of the United States government. Control, Mr. Bond, means the authority of the agency that originates information or its successor in function to regulate access to the information. The President is the ultimate original classification authority. And at least according to this 12-page declaration, he doesn't apparently know there may be a safe that may contain this information, nor apparently the contents of what is inside this safe that perhaps only the President and a few select individuals possess a need to know. And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to determine either whether that document is inside such a safe, or, in the alternative, why the President wishes not to discuss this matter, which has incidentally been attributed to more fatalities than Adolf Hitler in the Holocaust in half the time worldwide, and around 1.2 million American lives. More fatalities in both world wars, the conflict in Southeast Asia, and the terror attacks on 9/11 after just the first anniversary of the pandemic declaration. Okay, I shall discuss this with my team. Time is of essence, James. We have no more time to waste. And I shall get back to you. And Mr. Bond, need I remind you, please, try to be discreet this time. Am I not always? Oh, James. And Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas and peace on earth. This is the NSA. We don't do world peace.
Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge, the coming administration, in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest. This has been a Film Ways presentation, darling. And y'all go back now. Yeah.